think it's it's fantastic to have this opportunity to share research and to kind of to talk about this common interest around screen time and children. And following on from Susan's presentation, mine kind of naturally flows in the sense that Susan's has, her work has looked at screen time within families and within early years settings and so on. This project that I'm about to talk about is firmly situated in 3 community kindergartens, not CNK kindergartens, Gowrie kindergartens, really set out to look at the ways in which devices might be used in an early years setting. My work, just to kind of locate myself a little bit, all of my background has been in media education and the use of technologies and media more generally in classrooms, right through from early years through to tertiary actually. And I'm in the education faculty at QUT, but also I have a joint appointment across into the creative industries faculty. So I spent a fair bit of my time looking kind of broadly at the ways in which media and technologies get used in all sorts of situations. So this, I wanted to start with 3 provocations, and they kind of fit in with the sorts of things that Susan was saying. So first of all, I think, following on, I think it's fairly clear from Susan's presentation, and I would also want to say that, not all screen time is equal. Screen time means lots of different things in lots of different circumstances. Screen time is very much, a practice that occurs across a whole array of different kinds of spaces and places. So it may happen, in the family lounge room. It may happen in a child's bedroom, but it's just as likely to be happening in the backseat of a car as children are going to school, or at a sporting event where a sibling who isn't involved in that sporting event is being entertained in a different kind of way, or it might be happening in a very formal setting in a classroom or an early years centre. I would want to say right up front that for me, children are not at risk from technology per se, but from the social and cultural practices around technology. So I think that's what we need to get right. I think too much of the discussion around devices and screens and people generally kind of focuses on this idea that somehow the screen does something to the person. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist, and I know that there is some work, in recent years around brain mapping and looking for differences and changes in people's brains when they're engaged in screen time and so on. I personally haven't seen any of that research that's been overly convincing about the ways in which the brain may change in negative ways in relation to screen time. But I do believe, I'm far more convinced by the idea that the ways in which devices and technologies get taken up by people and get used by people, that's what really matters. Screens are with us to stay, whether we like it or not. It's pretty difficult to imagine a future where we can get away from screens, even if we want to.
We're staring at one now.
Exactly. I mean, of course, we can go off and go camping. Recently my family went camping for a weekend at the end of the Easter break, and we banned devices, no screens at all. We did sit around playing cards and games and things, and had lots of fun. And the kids didn't seem to miss the devices. They wanted to get back to them once we got home. But apart from doing that kind of thing, it's pretty difficult to imagine futures where, as people just living in our contemporary society, we won't have technologies in our lives. For that reason, I want to argue that we should be developing digital media literacies from a very young age, or what I refer to as the kind of building blocks of digital media literacy. And we have an opportunity to do that in early years centres, I think. So the project that I was involved with, which was very generously funded by the Ian Potter Foundation, which is a philanthropic organisation, worked in 3 community kindergartens for a period of a year. And it was a pretty straightforward, simple educational experiment, if you like, in the sense that we used our funding to purchase iPads for each of those kindergartens. So we purchased a MacBook and 10 iPads for each of the centres, and we put them into the centres. We did some PD with the teachers and other staff in the centres. So we had them come to QUT, and we enrolled the kindergarten teachers as co-investigators. So we really said to them that this wasn't about QUT staff telling you what to do in your centre. It was very much about working together to see what might or might not be useful in the kindergarten space. So we did introduce some apps and things to the teachers that they may not have been familiar with, and we did talk about some pedagogic strategies, and we did a bit of planning and so on as a team before we let these iPads loose on the kids. But it was really a process of experimenting and trying things out as we went throughout the year. Right. So I'm not going to go through every detail of the project, but what I do want to say is that we very quickly wanted to move from, apps that might be sort of considered to be transmission-style apps to apps that were more about creative interaction and about producing stuff with the iPads. So many of you will be familiar with the finger tracing style apps where you do letter and number recognition and so on, where you get rewarded for tracing your finger over a letter correctly and so on. We weren't necessarily against those kinds of apps being used. We certainly wanted to see if the children were interested in using those apps. But we also, I think, recognised that there would be limitations to how useful those apps might be for learning. And I would argue that what we did see was that when the iPads were left at a station, as one station within the space, and those kind of finger tracing type apps were just made available, or even other sort of entertainment going across into educational style apps, those weren't overly attractive to the children. In fact, we saw lots of instances where the teachers were trying to coax the children to go and use the iPad station. So after some initial excitement and some initial kind of attention that the children gave to the iPads, they fairly quickly just sort of started going to other stations because they were more interesting to them. So it wasn't until we were really encouraged, and I think too, going along with that, there was a lot of anxiety amongst the teachers, and they were very upfront about this, that somehow the iPads would get damaged, they might be dropped, or something along those lines. And so the children weren't encouraged, particularly for about the first third of the project, to kind of pick the iPads up and take them around the space and use them in different parts of the centre. The only iPad that got damaged during the whole project, of the 30 iPads, was one that a teacher dropped. Which is kind of ironic. It was when the children were encouraged to start taking the iPads and using them to do things like document their work and just capture things around the centre and so on. That's when we started to see more use of the iPads. When they really became, I suppose, tools for creativity. And one of the things that we, I think, which became very obvious to us in this project was that often we don't imagine iPads being used as creative devices. Often we think about them as being devices on which you will access an app, an educational app, that is then going to teach you something. Whereas in fact, an iPad is, has a very powerful camera on it for taking either still photographs or video footage, and also has a microphone that you can use to record your voice. And so once we started to introduce apps that allowed children to take photographs, pull them into an app, record their voice, and then maybe with the assistance of the teacher add some text and so on, that's when we started to see some really interesting things happening. I've put this example up here as an instance of that. So one of the things that occurred in one of the kindergartens was that the teacher wanted the children to think about texture. And she was very keen on the idea that you could explore texture visually, so that the children could think about the texture of something like a tree or some sort of surface and run their hand over it and feel the texture of it and so on. But then that there were ways in which you might kind of capture that visually and to remind yourself of what the texture might be. So she had this whole host of great examples of where the kids had gone around the centre and taken different types of shots within the space. So, and she did use the terms close-up, medium shot, long shot, and so on. But then these children were also able to take these iPads home, and as a kind of very loose homework activity, because the teacher wanted to involve parents in this project as well, she sort of said to the parents, if you want to have your children, do that kind of shots activity at home, that would be okay. It wasn't a requirement or anything like that.
Can I just ask, did all the families have an iPad at home?
No, not all of them. I should have said from the outset that the project was partly funded on the basis that we were working in low SES kindergartens, and part of the argument for doing the project was that we wanted to ensure that children living in these communities weren't missing out on developing these digital literacy skills.
That was my next question.
But having said that, even though that was the case, I would, we did survey the parents. And I think 80% of parents had either an iPad or, if not an iPad, certainly a smartphone, which they were using to allow their children to access apps and so on. But yeah, it's a really, really valid question. And part of the project too was to allow the iPads to go home with the parents. So the parents, we ran some parent workshops. The parents were then able to take the iPads home and use them with their children at home. So that was part of how this occurred. But when the iPads came back, there were these kinds of images on them. So the children had gone home and taken photographs like this. So this little girl here had asked her mum to help her take photographs of long shot, medium shot and close up, which is really kind of interesting because, when we're talking about media studies and so on, sometimes this kind of work doesn't get introduced until at least year 8, and sometimes not until later than that as well. So Bruce Nussbaum talks about creative intelligence, and one part of this project was to explore children's creativity along with their literacy development. And so this notion of sort of serious play comes through, the idea that you play to learn, and I'm not telling you anything that you don't know in relation to that. But we would argue, I think, from this project that that certainly the children were playing to learn through using various apps. So this app is one called Draw and Tell. We didn't tend to kind of promote particular apps during this project in terms of, this wasn't an assessment of it, apps, sort of educational merit and so on. But having said that, the Duck Duck Moose apps tended to be ones that were particularly useful in our project. So here's
so
just...
can I just ask, so did the educators actually, so they could just use whatever app they liked? They didn't go through any selection process?
We at the beginning of the project, we talked about the kinds of apps that you might use, but part of it was to explore different apps and for people to go off and find their own and try them out and see which ones might be useful as well. Okay. So this is a little girl just kind of play acting storytelling as she's using these stickers on the screen.
One day there was a horse. The supermarket flung around, and then he was actually, got together. and I was singing all around. And then the elves came and wanted to sing with them. So he wanted to sing, and they both sing together. And then I got onto a horse with all their friends, and the monster said, "Well, I'm going to eat you up." Before they got eaten up, they both not got eaten up.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm not making any claim for this apart from the idea that, here's obviously an example of an app that is supporting storytelling, it's supporting creativity and imagination, it's supporting imaginative play, which I think is, which is important, obviously, for children of this age. And this could happen, with other objects and items. It doesn't have to happen with an iPad, but, equally, it can happen quite powerfully with an iPad. And I think too, the idea that the story is recorded and then, the children can play that back to their parents or to their teacher, and there can be a discussion around that recording. And then, further instances of that imaginative play where perhaps children learn to tell the story more effectively, might also be quite powerful. So just very quickly, I'm aware of my time here, one of the things that we've put forward out of this project and another one that I've worked on with primary school children is this idea of the building blocks of digital media literacy. So where devices like this and other devices like cameras and just computers with editing software and so on, increasingly I think we can think about them as tools that allow children to interact with digital materials. And so therefore essentially image, sound and text. And those digital materials can be combined in different kinds of ways for different purposes. For storytelling, for communicating, for sharing information, and so on. But that's not much use unless you are working through particular conceptual understandings. So within media education frameworks, that often comes down to something like media languages, so various shot types and so on, audiences, representations, so how are you creating an image of something, representing it, so on. Institutions, so starting to ask some questions, some critical questions around why a piece of media perhaps exists, who made it, why does it exist, and even with very young children you can have good conversations around, is this piece of media there to inform you, is it there to entertain you, is it trying to persuade you perhaps? And then technologies themselves, so how can we use technologies in different ways for different purposes? And so this works through media production, various types of media production which can be more or less formal, and also through media analysis, so sitting down and talking about things that other people have made and then playing around with the sorts of designs that are put forward in those various forms of media. I'll show you this example. So this is where a lot of this for me comes together. So this was where in one of the kindergartens the teacher asked the children to reimagine the playground space, and she asked them to do a drawing of the space and then to talk about it. So admittedly with some assistance from the teacher, this child has gone out to the playground, taken a photograph, brought that into the Draw and Tell app. She has then drawn over the top of the photograph to draw what she would imagine the playground should look like. And then in the next step, she records her voice explaining what she would like to see in the playground. So we can see those digital materials all being used in combination to communicate something, which is quite powerful for a 4-year-old, I think.
I want a flower and a coffee house and a baby spike eating on the bush and a fairy.
Okay, pretty straightforward stuff that she wants, but nonetheless she's communicating it quite well, I think. Okay, so I'll just wrap up with this. So I think one of the things we should be talking about is a kind of a new digital basics, if you like. So some of the things that we need to think about as educators if we want to use screens well in formal education spaces at least. So I think we do need to think about authentic literacies and creativity. So, you know, the finger tracing apps go so far. It's when you do these more creative, interesting things with literacy, with a device like this, that I think, you know, you can really take things forward. I think thinking about digital pedagogies is really important. So, you know, if I was to kind of say that one key finding that comes out of this this project that might be of use for you guys, it would be that idea of having an iPad station is really kind of counterintuitive in a sense to what, you know, the most powerful ways in which iPads can be used. If they sit in the corner there, they will just be screen time devices in terms of consumption devices. They probably won't get used for creativity and production work. Digital media literacies, as I've just been saying, are really important, I think. We do need to develop digital literacies from a very young age, and we can start working on them, you know, with children in preschool settings for sure. Converged play and learning, I think, is a really important concept. So a lot of people think it's an either or, and this came up as a theme constantly throughout our project, particularly from parents, that, you know, if they're doing the iPads, then they won't be doing this. If they're reading a book on an iPad, for instance, then maybe they won't want to read a physical book. And we didn't see any evidence for that. We saw the children moving across the two constantly, moving from using real paint and paper, and then taking photographs of that and then going digital. So this sort of converged play and learning. And then networking digital technologies so that the digital technology becomes just another thing in the space in a sense. It doesn't become, you know, this precious item in the corner. It's another thing, another tool that's available in the space. So for me, one of the kind of important outcomes of this is that, going back to that original thing of not all screen time is equal, you know, I think often, you know, if we were to strictly adhere to that, you know, no more than 2 hours a day sort of thing, or whatever the recommendation is currently, then, you know, we would be missing lots of these opportunities. I think we'd use it all up with kids relaxing, and, you know, I don't have a problem with kids relaxing and being entertained by the screen, but I think that then, you know, that shouldn't mean that they can't also do some more screen time stuff in class. And I have seen, you know, reports and parents saying, well, we shouldn't have iPads in kindergartens because they get enough screen time at home. You know, it should be a space where they can do other things. I don't adhere to that for the reasons I've given. So I'll leave it there and pass over to Stuart.